Hi, I'm Maya. They thought I was just their personal ATM with legs. Every family dinner, every celebration, every random Tuesday when they felt like eating somewhere nice, guess who got stuck with the check? That would be me, the successful graphic designer, who apparently had money growing on trees in her downtown loft. They'd order the most expensive items on the menu, laugh about how generous their little Maya was, then mysteriously disappear when the bill arrived. But here's what they didn't know. I wasn't just paying for their meals. I was paying for front row seats to watch their faces when they realized who actually owned the place. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain drummed against my apartment windows in that gentle, persistent way that makes Portland feel like home. I stood at my kitchen counter, steam rising from my coffee mug, watching the Willamette River flow past in the early morning light. My loft was quiet, except for the soft jazz playing from my vintage record player, and the occasional creak of the building settling into another Pacific Northwest day. Mrs. Rodriguez from the unit below had left a small pot of her famous salsa, verde, by my door again, along with a note written in her careful cursive. Para la chica que siempre ayuda, it read, for the girl who always helps. I smiled, remembering how I'd helped her navigate the property management company's rent increase last month. Unlike my own family, Mrs. Rodriguez's gratitude felt genuine, warm, without the underlying expectation that I'd solve her next problem too. I checked my phone out of habit. 3 missed calls from Jessica, my older sister, and a string of texts that made my stomach tighten even before I read them. Maya, call me back ASAP. Mom's birthday dinner tonight, remember? We made reservations at that new place downtown, the fancy one with the waiting list. You're still covering dinner, right? Ryan just got that promotion, but you know how it is with startup costs. I set the phone down and took a deeper breath. This was the pattern. This had always been the pattern. Ever since Dad died 5 years ago and left me with what they assumed was a substantial life insurance payout, I'd become the family's unofficial financier. What they didn't know was that the money they thought came from insurance actually came from something much more complicated, something that would have changed everything if they'd bothered to ask questions instead of just holding out their hands. My laptop chimed with an email notification. Carlos, my restaurant manager, was sending me the weekly reports from Harvest Moon Bistro. Revenue was up 12% from last month. The new seasonal menu was getting rave reviews, and we'd just been featured in Portland Monthly's Best Farm-to-Table Experiences. I scrolled through photos he'd attached of last night's dinner service. The exposed brick walls glowed warmly under Edison bulb lighting, tables full of couples and families enjoying carefully crafted dishes made from ingredients sourced within 50 miles of the city. My family had no idea I owned the place. To them, I was Maya, the struggling graphic designer who somehow always seemed to have enough money to bail them out of their financial inconveniences. I'd let them believe this story because it was easier than explaining the truth. Easier than watching them calculate exactly how much they thought they could get from me if they knew I owned one of Portland's most successful restaurants. I poured a second cup of coffee and settled into my reading chair, the one positioned perfectly to catch the morning light. The truth was, I'd been supporting my family for so long that it had become automatic, like breathing or checking the weather. Jessica's mortgage payment when Ryan's tech startup didn't pay him for 3 months. Mom's car repairs when she insisted she needed the latest model, but couldn't quite afford the monthly payments. Ashley's credit card debt from what she called essential purchases, but looked suspiciously like shopping therapy. Each time they'd present their problems with this mixture of casual assumption and manufactured crisis. Maya, you know I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. You're so good with money, and it's just temporary. Family helps family, right? And each time, I'd transfer the funds without argument, watching my bank account decrease while their gratitude lasted exactly as long as it took them to think of the next thing they needed. The graphic design work was real, but it was more of a creative outlet than a necessity. I'd built up a small client base of local businesses who needed logos, websites, marketing materials. It was satisfying work that let me collaborate with other creative people in the city, and it provided the perfect cover story for my family. They could understand a freelance designer having irregular income, having good months and bad months, having enough to help out but not enough to seem threatening. What they couldn't understand, what I'd never told them, was that their little Maya had inherited more than just Dad's life insurance money. Grandma Chen had left me her entire estate, including a commercial property in downtown Portland that I'd quietly transformed into Harvest Moon Bistro. She'd been the one person in our family who saw potential in me beyond my willingness to solve other people's problems. I remembered the day she pulled me aside during my college graduation party. "Maya," she'd said in her soft voice that somehow commanded attention, "you have a gift for making people feel cared for, but don't let them mistake kindness for weakness. Sometimes the people who love you the most will take the most, simply because they can." At the time, I'd thought she was being overly dramatic. Now, 5 years later, her words felt like prophecy. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Mom. "Darling, Jessica told me about tonight. I'm so excited to finally try this Harvest Moon place everyone's been talking about. I made sure to mention when I called that my daughter would be handling the bill, so they'll take good care of us. See you at 7. I stared at the message for a long moment. They were going to Harvest Moon, my restaurant, the place I'd poured my heart, my inheritance, and my dreams into for the past 3 years. The place where Carlos and I had carefully crafted every detail, from the locally sourced menu to the custom tables made by a woodworker in Bend. They were going to sit in my dining room, eat food prepared by my chef, enjoy wine from my carefully curated cellar, and assume their little Maya would show up to foot the bill like always. I walked to my bedroom and opened the closet. Past the casual clothes I wore for my design meetings, past the nice but not too nice outfits I wore to family gatherings, hung a section of clothes most of my family had never seen. Tailored blazers, elegant dresses, the kinds of pieces a successful restaurant owner might wear to industry events or meetings with investors. I selected a deep emerald dress, simple but unmistakably expensive, and laid it on my bed. Tonight was going to be different. Not because I was planning some dramatic confrontation or elaborate revenge scheme, but because I was tired of pretending to be smaller than I was. I was tired of watching my family treat my success as their safety net without ever asking what my dreams might be. I was tired of being grateful for their attention while they were only grateful for my money. The morning passed quietly. I worked on a logo design for a new bakery in the Hawthorne district, losing myself in the familiar rhythm of creating something beautiful from nothing. Around noon, I called Carlos to let him know I'd be dining at the restaurant that evening, with my family. "They don't know you own the place?" he asked, and I could hear both confusion and amusement in his voice. Carlos had been with me since the beginning, had watched me transform the empty commercial space into something magical, had seen me work 18-hour days to get every detail right. "It's complicated," I said, which was my standard response to questions about my family. "Just treat us like any other guests. Don't acknowledge that you know me beyond normal hospitality." "Maya," Carlos said gently, "you know they're going to find out eventually, right? The staff, the regular customers, people in the industry, everyone knows this is your place." I knew he was right. I'd been living in a strange bubble, compartmentalizing my life so completely that I sometimes forgot how small Portland's restaurant scene really was. But I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. Wasn't ready to see the calculations start spinning behind my family's eyes when they realized exactly how much money they'd been leaving on the table. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself thinking about Dad. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He would have loved Harvest Moon. would have been proud of what I'd built. He'd always encouraged my creativity, had been the one to suggest I study business alongside art in college. "You have good instincts, Maya," he'd told me. "Trust them, even when other people try to tell you you're wrong." Dad had also been the one to see through Jessica's manipulation, Mom's emotional blackmail, Ashley's convenient crises. He'd never said anything directly, but I'd caught him watching them sometimes during family gatherings, his expression thoughtful and slightly sad. After he died, I'd felt responsible for maintaining family harmony, for being the stable one who kept everyone connected. But harmony built on financial dependency wasn't really harmony at all. I spent the rest of the afternoon preparing. Not just getting dressed, but preparing mentally for whatever the evening might bring. I wasn't planning to reveal my ownership of the restaurant, but I also wasn't planning to sit silently while they treated me like their personal bank account. I was going to pay attention tonight. Really pay attention to how they spoke to me, how they spoke about me, how they assumed I'd react. As the sun began to set over the city, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that made Portland look like a watercolor painting, I put on the emerald dress and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the accommodating, slightly overwhelmed younger sister my family expected to see. She was someone who'd built something beautiful from nothing, who'd honored her grandmother's memory by turning an inheritance into a thriving business, who'd quietly become one of the most respected restaurant owners in the city. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, my heart beating just a little faster than usual. Tonight, for the first time in years, I was going to sit at a table in my own restaurant and watch my family be themselves when they thought no one important was watching. I had no idea what I was going to discover, but I had a feeling it was going to change everything. The drive through downtown Portland felt different tonight. Past the food trucks and coffee shops, past the murals and galleries that made this city feel alive with creativity, past the other restaurants that I'd studied and learned from as I built my own dream. When I pulled up in front of Harvest Moon, I sat in my car for a moment, looking at the warm light spilling from the windows, the elegant sign that Carlos and I had agonized over, the small line of people waiting to see if they could get a table without a reservation. This was mine. I'd built this. I'd built. And tonight, I was going to find out what my family really thought of the woman they assumed would always be there to catch them when they fell. The valet recognized me immediately, though he played his part perfectly, greeting me with the same professional courtesy he showed every guest. "Good evening, welcome to Harvest Moon," he said, taking my keys with a slight nod that acknowledged our shared secret. I walked through the entrance I'd designed myself, past the host stand where Maria, tonight's hostess, smiled warmly without giving anything away. The restaurant hummed with the gentle energy of a successful dinner service. Every table was occupied. The lighting cast everything in a golden glow, and the scent of roasted vegetables and fresh herbs filled the air. I'd dreamed of this atmosphere for years before I'd ever had the money to make it real, sketching ideas on napkins during my college years, collecting inspiration photos from food magazines I couldn't afford to subscribe to. I spotted my family immediately. They'd claimed the best table in the house, naturally, the corner booth with the view of the open kitchen and the wine cellar beyond. Jessica was already gesturing animatedly to their server, probably making special requests or asking about ingredients she'd never heard of. Mom sat with her back straight, surveying the room like a queen holding court. Ryan was studying the wine list with the intensity of someone trying to order the most impressive bottle possible. Ashley had her phone out, taking photos of everything for her social media followers. None of them had noticed me yet. I stood near the entrance for a moment, watching them in their natural element, and realized this might be the first time I'd ever observed my family when they didn't know I was present. The way Jessica snapped her fingers to get the server's attention. The way Mom corrected the pronunciation of an appetizer name with obvious condescension. The way Ryan complained loudly about the price of cocktails while simultaneously ordering the most expensive one on the menu. I approached their table slowly, weaving between other diners who were enjoying quiet conversations over carefully prepared meals. The closer I got, the more clearly I could hear their conversation, and what I heard made something cold settle in my stomach. "She's always at least 15 minutes late," Jessica was saying, checking her watch with theatrical annoyance. "Probably trying to figure out which credit card still has room on it." They all laughed, the kind of mean-spirited giggling that feels like fingernails on a chalkboard. "Remember when she tried to split a check at Olive Garden last year?" Ashley added, twirling her hair around her finger. "Like, girl, you're the one with the steady income. Don't make this weird for the rest of us." Mom pursed her lips in that way that meant she was about to deliver what she considered wisdom. Maya's always been dramatic about money, ever since Robert died. She's gotten these ideas about being more careful with spending. But family is family. She knows we'd do the same for her if the situation were reversed. Ryan snorted. "When would Maya ever need money from us? She's got that whole freelance thing figured out, living in that fancy downtown apartment, always talking about her little design projects like they're changing the world." "The apartment isn't that fancy," Jessica said dismissively. "I mean, it's downtown, but it's probably some converted warehouse space that she's making sound more impressive than it is. You know how she exaggerates." I stood frozen just a few feet from their table, completely invisible to them, watching them dissect my life with the casual cruelty of people who'd never bothered to learn who I actually was. They'd created an entire narrative about me that served their purposes, and they'd never once asked if it was true. The server approached their table with water glasses and menus. "Good evening, folks. My name is David, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Have you had a chance to look over our cocktail menu?" "Finally," Jessica muttered under her breath, then smiled brightly at David. "Hi there. We're expecting one more person, but she's running late as usual. Can we start with drinks? I'd like the lavender gin fizz and make it strong. We're celebrating." "What are we celebrating?" Ashley asked, and I realized I'd stepped close enough to hear every word clearly. "Mom's birthday, obviously," Jessica replied, "but also the fact that Maya's finally going to experience what real food tastes like. I looked this place up online, and apparently it's impossible to get reservations. They're booked solid for months. But I dropped a few hints about Maya being in the food industry when I called, and suddenly they had space for us." My blood turned to ice. She'd lied to get the reservation. She'd claimed I worked in the food industry, which technically wasn't false, but she'd used my supposed connections to secure a table at my own restaurant. The audacity was breathtaking. "Maya works in food now?" Ryan asked, looking confused. "No, dummy," Jessica said with exaggerated patience. "But she's always posting those artsy photos of fancy meals on Instagram. I figured they'd assume she was some kind of food blogger or something. Worked like a charm." Mom nodded approvingly. "That's smart thinking, Jessica. Maya's always benefited from our family's reputation in this city. It's about time her name opened some doors for us instead of us always opening our wallets for her." I felt like I was watching myself from outside my body. These people, my own family, had just revealed that they saw me as both their personal bank account and their ticket to experiences they couldn't access on their own. I knew where this was heading. Jessica had been asking about my living situation for months, trying to calculate how much I was spending on rent, how much disposable income that left me with. "Rent must be brutal downtown," Ryan added helpfully. "What are you paying, if you don't mind me asking? I've been looking at places in the area for when we upgrade from the suburbs." The question hung in the air like a trap waiting to be sprung. They wanted to know how much money I had, how much I could afford to spend on their dinner, how much they could reasonably expect me to contribute to their future financial emergencies. "I manage," I said simply, which was the truth. I managed very well, considering I owned the building my apartment was in, along with the restaurant where we were currently sitting. But they didn't need to know that. David returned with a wine list, presenting it to Jessica with a flourish. "For your celebration tonight," he said. "Would you like me to recommend something that would pair well with your dinner choices?" Jessica's eyes scanned the wine list, and I watched her face change as she processed the prices. These weren't Olive Garden prices. These were the prices of a restaurant that took wine seriously, that had invested in a cellar full of carefully selected bottles from around the world. "What would you recommend?" she asked David, and I could hear the slight uncertainty creeping into her voice. "For the duck confit and the ribeye special, I'd suggest something bold and rich," David replied smoothly. "We have an excellent Cabernet Sauvignon from Walla Walla that would complement both dishes beautifully. Or, if you're interested in trying something local, we have a Syrah from the Rogue Valley that's been getting wonderful reviews." "Prices?" Jessica asked, trying to sound casual. "The Cabernet is $120 and the Syrah is $95. I watched the color drain slightly from Jessica's face, but she recovered quickly. "The Syrah sounds perfect," she said, closing the wine list with decisive snap. "Maya, you'll love it. It's local. You know how you're always talking about supporting local businesses." I did indeed support local businesses, including the vineyard that produced the Syrah she'd just ordered. I'd driven down to the Rogue Valley myself to meet with the winemaker, had spent an afternoon learning about their process, had personally approved the addition of their wines to our menu. But I just smiled and nodded as if I were hearing about it for the first time. As we waited for our appetizers to arrive, the conversation flowed in its usual patterns. Jessica complained about Ryan's long hours at the startup. Mom updated us. On her book club drama, Ashley shared gossip about mutual acquaintances from high school. It was all surface-level chatter, the kind of conversation that fills space without saying anything meaningful. But underneath the familiar rhythm, I found myself listening differently tonight. I noticed how often they made jokes at my expense, how frequently they referenced my supposed naive generosity, how casually they dismissed my opinions about anything that didn't directly benefit them. When the duck confit arrived, presented beautifully on a wooden board with artisanal crackers and cornichons, Jessica immediately claimed the largest portion. "This looks incredible," she said, arranging crackers on her plate with theatrical precision. "Maya, you have to try this. I bet you've never had duck prepared like this before." I had, of course. I'd tasted this exact dish dozens of times during menu development, had worked with our chef to adjust the seasoning and presentation until it was perfect. But I took a small piece on a cracker and made appreciative noises as if experiencing duck confit for the first time. "It's delicious," I said, which was absolutely true. "I told you this place was special," Jessica said with satisfaction. "I'm so glad I was able to get us a reservation. Apparently, they usually book up months in advance, but sometimes connections can open doors." Mom raised her wine glass, which David had filled with a sample of the Syrah for her approval. "To connections," she said, "and to family who support each other." They all raised their glasses, including me, though the irony of the toast wasn't lost on me. We were toasting family support while they prepared to stick me with a bill that would likely exceed $400 in a restaurant they'd only gained access to by lying about my professional connections. As the evening progressed and our main courses arrived, I found myself cataloging every casual cruelty, every thoughtless assumption, every moment when they treated me like a convenient solution to their problems rather than a person with my own life and dreams. The ribeye special looked spectacular, perfectly cooked and artfully plated, but I barely tasted my roasted chicken as I processed the growing realization that this dynamic had been building for years. They talked about their upcoming vacation plans, a family trip to Hawaii that they'd mentioned before but never directly invited me to join. They discussed Jessica's plans to renovate her kitchen, Ryan's dreams of buying a boat, Ashley's desire to move to a more expensive apartment. All of these conversations had an underlying assumption that Maya would somehow contribute financially when the time came, that my resources were automatically available for their use. When David appeared to ask about dessert, I watched Jessica's eyes light up as she scanned the dessert menu. "The chocolate souffle sounds amazing," she said. "And look, they have a dessert wine pairing option. Should we go for it?" "It's Mom's birthday," Ashley said, as if that justified any expense. "We should definitely get dessert." I looked around the table at these people who shared my DNA, but seemed to live in a completely different moral universe. They were perfectly willing to order the most expensive items on the menu, to add wine pairings and premium cocktails and elaborate desserts, all while assuming that I would quietly absorb the financial impact without complaint. "Actually," I said, my voice steady and calm, "I think I'll pass on dessert, but please, everyone else should have whatever they'd like." Jessica looked at me with surprise. "Are you sure? The souffle is meant for sharing." "I'm sure," I said. "You all enjoy it." As they ordered dessert and another round of drinks, I excused myself to use the restroom again. But instead of heading to the bathroom, I walked toward the kitchen, nodding to staff members who recognized me but maintained their professional discretion. I found Carlos in his usual spot during dinner service, expediting orders and keeping watch over the controlled chaos of a busy kitchen. "How's it going out there?" he asked quietly, not looking away from the plates being prepared in front of him. "About as expected," I said. "They've run up quite a bill." "You want me to handle this differently? I can have David bring you a separate check for your meal." I shook my head. "No, let them play this out completely. I want to see exactly how far they're willing to go." Carlos glanced at me with something that looked like concern. "You sure you're ready for this? Once you reveal who you are, there's no going back. Things with your family are going to change permanently." I thought about that for a moment, watching the kitchen staff work with the precision and passion that I'd helped foster in this restaurant. These people, many of whom I'd hired personally, treated me with respect and genuine affection. They valued my opinion, appreciated my contributions, and never once made me feel like I was only useful for what I could provide financially. "Maybe it's time for things to change," I said. I returned to the table just as their dessert arrived. The chocolate souffle was a work of art, rising perfectly above the ramekin, accompanied by vanilla bean ice cream and a delicate tuile cookie. David had also brought the dessert wine pairing, a port that complemented the rich chocolate beautifully. I knew where this was heading. Jessica had been asking about my living situation for months, trying to calculate how much I was spending on rent, how much disposable income that left me with. "Rent must be brutal downtown," Ryan added helpfully. "What are you paying if you don't mind me asking?" "I've been looking at places in the area for when we upgrade from the suburbs." The question hung in the air like a trap waiting to be sprung. They wanted to know how much money I had, how much I could afford to spend on their dinner, how much they could reasonably expect me to contribute to their future financial emergencies. "I manage," I said simply, which was the truth. I managed very well, considering I owned the building my apartment was in, along with the restaurant where we were currently sitting. But they didn't need to know that. David returned with a wine list, presenting it to Jessica with a flourish. "For your celebration tonight," he said. "Would you like me to recommend something that would pair well with your dinner choices?" Jessica's eyes scanned the wine list, and I watched her face change as she processed the prices. These weren't Olive Garden prices. These were the prices of a restaurant that took wine seriously, that had invested in a cellar full of carefully selected bottles from around the world. "What would you recommend?" she asked David, and I could hear the slight uncertainty creeping into her voice. "For the duck confit and the ribeye special, I'd suggest something bold and rich," David replied smoothly. "We have an excellent Cabernet Sauvignon from Walla Walla that would complement both dishes beautifully. Or, if you're interested in trying something local, we have a Syrah from the Rogue Valley that's been getting wonderful reviews." "Prices?" Jessica asked, trying to sound casual. "The Cabernet is $120 and the Syrah is $95. I watched the color drain slightly from Jessica's face, but she recovered quickly. "The Sierra sounds perfect," she said, closing the wine list with decisive snap. "Maya, you'll love it. It's local. You know how you're always talking about supporting local businesses." I did indeed support local businesses, including the vineyard that produced the Syrah she'd just ordered. I'd driven down to the Rogue Valley myself to meet with the winemaker, had spent an afternoon learning about their process, had personally approved the addition of their wines to our menu. But I just smiled and nodded as if I were hearing about it for the first time. As we waited for our appetizers to arrive, the conversation flowed in its usual patterns. Jessica complained about Ryan's long hours at the startup. Mom updated us. On her book club drama, Ashley shared gossip about mutual acquaintances from high school. It was all surface-level chatter, the kind of conversation that fills space without saying anything meaningful. But underneath the familiar rhythm, I found myself listening differently tonight. I noticed how often they made jokes at my expense, how frequently they referenced my supposed naive generosity, how casually they dismissed my opinions about anything that didn't directly benefit them. When the duck confit arrived, presented beautifully on a wooden board with artisanal crackers and cornichons, Jessica immediately claimed the largest portion. "This looks incredible," she said, arranging crackers on her plate with theatrical precision. "Maya, you have to try this. I bet you've never had duck prepared like this before." I had, of course. I'd tasted this exact dish dozens of times during menu development, had worked with our chef to adjust the seasoning and presentation until it was perfect. But I took a small piece on a cracker and made appreciative noises as if experiencing duck confit for the first time. "It's delicious," I said, which was absolutely true. "I told you this place was special," Jessica said with satisfaction. "I'm so glad I was able to get us a reservation. Apparently, they usually book up months in advance, but sometimes connections can open doors." Mom raised her wine glass, which David had filled with a sample of the Syrah for her approval. "To connections," she said, "and to family who support each other." They all raised their glasses, including me, though the irony of the toast wasn't lost on me. We were toasting family support while they prepared to stick me with a bill that would likely exceed $400 in a restaurant they'd only gained access to by lying about my professional connections. As the evening progressed and our main courses arrived, I found myself cataloging every casual cruelty, every thoughtless assumption, every moment when they treated me like a convenient solution to their problems rather than a person with my own life and dreams. The ribeye special looked spectacular, perfectly cooked and artfully plated, but I barely tasted my roasted chicken as I processed the growing realization that this dynamic had been building for years. They talked about their upcoming vacation plans, a family trip to Hawaii that they'd mentioned before but never directly invited me to join. They discussed Jessica's plans to renovate her kitchen, Ryan's dreams of buying a boat, Ashley's desire to move to a more expensive apartment. All of these conversations had an underlying assumption that Maya would somehow contribute financially when the time came, that my resources were automatically available for their use. When David appeared to ask about dessert, I watched Jessica's eyes light up as she scanned the dessert menu. "The chocolate soufflé sounds amazing," she said. "And look, they have a dessert wine pairing option. Should we go for it?" "It's Mom's birthday," Ashley said, as if that justified any expense. "We should definitely get dessert." I looked around the table at these people who shared my DNA, but seemed to live in a completely different moral universe. They were perfectly willing to order the most expensive items on the menu, to add wine pairings and premium cocktails and elaborate desserts, all while assuming that I would quietly absorb the financial impact without complaint. "Actually," I said, my voice steady and calm, "I think I'll pass on dessert, but please, everyone else should have whatever they'd like." Jessica looked at me with surprise. "Are you sure? The soufflé is meant for sharing." "I'm sure," I said. "You all enjoy it." As they ordered dessert and another round of drinks, I excused myself to use the restroom again. But instead of heading to the bathroom, I walked toward the kitchen, nodding to staff members who recognized me but maintained their professional discretion. I found Carlos in his usual spot during dinner service, expediting orders and keeping watch over the controlled chaos of a busy kitchen. "How's it going out there?" he asked quietly, not looking away from the plates being prepared in front of him. "About as expected," I said. "They've run up quite a bill." "You want me to handle this differently? I can have David bring you a separate check for your meal." I shook my head. "No, let them play this out completely. I want to see exactly how far they're willing to go." Carlos glanced at me with something that looked like concern. "You sure you're ready for this? Once you reveal who you are, there's no going back. Things with your family are going to change permanently." I thought about that for a moment, watching the kitchen staff work with the precision and passion that I'd helped foster in this restaurant. These people, many of whom I'd hired personally, treated me with respect and genuine affection. They valued my opinion, appreciated my contributions, and never once made me feel like I was only useful for what I could provide financially. "Maybe it's time for things to change," I said. I returned to the table just as their dessert arrived. The chocolate soufflé was a work of art, rising perfectly above the ramekin, accompanied by vanilla bean ice cream and a delicate tuile cookie. David had also brought the dessert wine pairing, a port that complemented the rich chocolate beautifully. I watched my family dig into the dessert with enthusiasm, their conversation growing louder and more animated as the evening wore on and the alcohol took effect. "Maya, you're missing out," Ashley said, waving her spoon in my direction. "This is seriously the best dessert I've ever had. The chocolate is so rich, and this wine makes everything taste even better." "I'm enjoying watching you all enjoy it," I said, which was partially true. There was something fascinating about observing them in their natural element, uninhibited by any awareness of who might be watching or listening. Jessica had moved on to planning their next family gathering. "We should do this more often," she declared, gesturing expansively with her wine glass. "I mean, Maya's always working. We're all busy with our own lives, but we need to make time for family, especially now that we've found this incredible place." "Speaking of which," Ryan said, lowering his voice conspiratorially, "do you think you could get us reservations here again? Maybe for our anniversary next month? I'd love to bring some clients here, show them we know the good spots in town." The audacity was breathtaking. Not only did they expect me to pay for tonight's meal, but they were already planning future visits, where I'd presumably cover the costs for their business entertainment and personal celebrations. "We'll see," I said noncommittally. Mom reached across the table and patted my hand with the kind of condescending affection usually reserved for small children. "You're so good to us, Maya. I know we don't say it enough, but we really appreciate everything you do for our family. Your father would be so proud of how you've stepped up since he passed." The mention of Dad sent a sharp pain through my chest. He would have been proud, but not for the reasons Mom assumed. He would have been proud that I'd built something meaningful with Grandma Chen's inheritance, that I'd honored her memory by creating a space where people could gather and share beautiful meals together. He would have been proud that I'd become a successful businesswoman in my own right. But he would have been deeply disappointed in how his surviving family members were treating me. As the evening wound down, I could see Jessica growing increasingly nervous about the bill. She kept glancing toward David, who was discreetly handling other tables while our family finished their wine and conversation. Finally, she caught his attention and gestured him over. "We're ready for the check," she announced, trying to sound casual about it. "Of course," David said smoothly. "I'll bring that right over." Jessica turned to me with a bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Maya, I hope you brought your good credit card tonight. I think we might have gotten a little carried away with our ordering." "Just a little," I replied dryly, thinking about the appetizer, 4 main courses, wine pairings, cocktails and dessert they'd consumed over the past 2 hours. When David returned with the check presenter, he placed it directly in front of me without any hesitation. Jessica didn't even glance at it before sliding it across the table to my side, as if the responsibility for payment had been predetermined and wasn't worth discussing. I opened the leather folder and looked at the total. $437, plus suggested gratuity. It was exactly what I'd expected based on what they'd ordered, but seeing the number in black and white still made my stomach tighten. This wasn't just dinner. This was someone's monthly car payment, or a significant chunk of rent, or weeks of groceries for a family on a budget. But what struck me most wasn't the amount itself, but the complete lack of acknowledgement from my family about what they were asking me to cover. No one offered to contribute. No one suggested splitting the bill. No one even thanked me in advance for handling the payment. They simply assumed it was my responsibility and moved on to other topics. "Should we get coffee somewhere else?" Ashley was asking. "I'm not ready for the night to end." "There's that new cocktail bar that opened in the Pearl District," Ryan T. suggested. "I've been wanting to check it out." They were already planning the next venue, the next round of drinks, the next bill they'd expect me to absorb without question. I closed the check presenter and placed my credit card inside, then set it back down on the table. "Actually," I said, my voice calm and measured, "I think I'm going to call it a night after this, but you all should definitely continue the celebration." Jessica looked at me with surprise. "Really? It's still early and it's Mom's birthday. Are you feeling okay?" "I'm feeling fine," I assured her. "Just tired. It's been a long week." David returned to collect the payment, and I watched him process my credit card with the same professional efficiency he showed every guest. When he brought back the receipt for my signature. He included a small business card tucked discreetly beneath the pen. I glanced at the card while my family continued their conversation about after-dinner plans. It was one of my own business cards, the ones I'd had printed when I first opened Harvest Moon. Maya Chen, owner and operator, Harvest Moon Bistro. David had slipped it to me as a subtle reminder of who I was in this space, a gentle nudge toward a truth that was becoming harder to ignore. As I signed the receipt and calculated the tip, I found myself thinking about the conversation I'd overheard earlier, when they'd called me dramatic about money and complained about my supposed financial caution. If they only knew that the woman they considered overly careful with spending had just paid for their meal at a restaurant that grossed over $2 million annually, a restaurant where I made every financial decision from wine purchases to staff salaries. After I'd settled the bill, we all gathered our things and prepared to leave. My family was still buzzing with energy from the wine and the excellent meal, chattering about what an amazing experience it had been. How impressed they were with the service and the food quality, how we'd have to come back soon. "Maya," Jessica said as we walked toward the exit, "you have to get us the name of whoever got you this reservation. I want to use the same connection for our anniversary dinner." I paused near the door, looking back at the dining room where other families and couples were enjoying their meals, where my staff was providing the kind of attentive, professional service I'd trained them to deliver, where every detail from the lighting to the music to the carefully curated wine list reflected my vision and hard work. "I'll see what I can do," I said. Outside, the Portland evening had turned crisp, with that clean scent that follows afternoon rain. The city lights reflected off wet pavement, and the usual sounds of downtown nightlife buzzed around us. My family stood in a cluster on the sidewalk, debating their next destination while the valet retrieved their cars. "Are you sure you won't come with us?" Mom asked, adjusting her wrap against the cool air. "We could find somewhere quieter if you're feeling overwhelmed." Overwhelmed, as if my reluctance to continue the evening stemmed from being unable to handle the stimulation of a night out, rather than from having spent 2 hours watching my family reveal exactly what they thought of me when they assumed no one important was listening. "I'm sure," I said. "You all have fun. Happy birthday, Mom." She hugged me briefly, the kind of perfunctory embrace that families exchange out of obligation rather than genuine affection. "Thank you for dinner, darling. It was absolutely wonderful. You always know the best places." Jessica was next, squeezing my arm as she kissed my cheek. "Seriously, Maya, tonight was perfect. I can't believe you managed to get us into this place. You're amazing." Ashley and Ryan offered similar thanks. Their gratitude focused entirely on my perceived ability to secure exclusive reservations rather than on my willingness to pay for their expensive meal. No one mentioned the $437 I'd just spent, as if acknowledging the financial aspect would somehow make the evening less magical. As their cars arrived and they dispersed to continue their celebration elsewhere, I stood alone on the sidewalk outside my own restaurant. Through the windows, I could see the dinner service continuing, David and the other servers moving efficiently. Between tables, Carlos visible through the kitchen past checking plates before they went out to guests. I walked around to the back entrance that employees used, letting myself in with my keycard. The familiar sounds and smells of the kitchen during service surrounded me as I made my way to my small office tucked behind the prep area. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop, pulling up the financial reports that Carlos had sent earlier. The numbers told the story of a thriving business. Revenue was strong, customer satisfaction scores were consistently high, and we were booked solid for the next 2 months. Food costs were under control, labor was running efficiently, and our profit margins were healthy. By any measure, Harvest Moon was a success story, the kind of business that other restaurateurs studied and tried to emulate. But sitting in my office listening to the sounds of my restaurant operating perfectly without my presence in the dining room, I felt a profound sense of disconnection. I'd built something beautiful and meaningful, something that brought joy to people's lives and provided stable employment for my staff. Yet the people who should have been most proud of my accomplishments had no idea what I'd achieved. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Thanks again for tonight. Already looking forward to our next family dinner at Harvest Moon. You're the best. Love you." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Glad you enjoyed it." Over the next few days, I found myself thinking constantly about that evening. Not just about the money, though the financial aspect was certainly part of it, but about the broader pattern of behavior I'd witnessed. My family had revealed themselves completely that night, showing me exactly how they viewed our relationships and what they expected from me going forward. I started paying closer attention to our interactions in a way I never had before. When Jessica called to complain about an unexpected car repair, I noticed how quickly the conversation shifted from catching up about our lives to her financial crisis. When Mom invited me to lunch, I realized she'd chosen an expensive restaurant and ordered multiple courses without ever reaching for her wallet. When Ashley asked me to help her move to a new apartment, the request came with the implicit assumption that I'd also cover the security deposit for her upgraded living situation. Each interaction followed the same pattern. They'd start with some minimal expression of interest in my life, quickly transition to their own problems or desires, and then wait for me to offer the financial solution they'd been angling toward. From the beginning, it was a well-rehearsed dance that I'd been performing for years without recognizing the choreography. I began documenting these interactions, not out of any desire for revenge or confrontation, but simply to understand the scope of what had been happening. I reviewed my bank statements from the past year, adding up all the transfers and payments I'd made on behalf of family members. The total was staggering, over $30,000 in direct financial support, not including the countless meals, gifts, and other expenses I'd absorbed during family gatherings. $30,000. That was more than many people made in a year, more than some families spent on housing, more than most college students accumulated in debt. I'd been functioning as an unpaid family foundation, dispensing funds without any oversight or accountability, simply because I had the means and they had the needs. But what disturbed me more than the financial aspect was the emotional pattern underlying these transactions. My family had learned to approach me with a specific combination of praise and crisis that reliably produced the results they wanted. They'd tell me how responsible I was, how successful, how generous, and then present me with a problem that only my financial intervention could solve. They'd frame their requests as temporary emergencies, family obligations, or investments in our shared relationships. And I'd fallen for it every time, partly because I wanted to help people I loved, but mostly because their appreciation felt like the only recognition I ever received for my hard work and success. When Jessica thanked me for covering her mortgage payment, when Mom praised my generosity after I paid for her car repairs, when Ashley called me her hero for solving her credit card crisis, I felt valued and important in a way I rarely experienced otherwise. Now I could see the transaction clearly. They offered me the emotional validation I craved in exchange for the financial support they needed. It was a business arrangement disguised as family love, and I'd been too invested in maintaining the illusion to recognize it for what it was. The realization was both liberating and devastating. Liberating because it explained so much about why our family interactions always left me feeling drained and vaguely resentful, even when they'd been pleasant on the surface. Devastating because it meant that the relationships I'd been working so hard to preserve weren't actually the relationships I thought they were. I was sitting in my apartment one evening, watching the sunset paint the Willamette River in shades of gold and pink, when my phone rang. Carlos's name appeared on the screen, and I answered with the automatic assumption that he was calling about restaurant business. "Maya," he said, his voice unusually serious. "We need to talk. Can you come in tomorrow morning before we open? There's something you should know." The tone of his voice sent a chill down my spine. "Is everything okay? Did something happen at the restaurant?" "Everything's fine operationally," he assured me. "But there's been some chatter around town that I think you should be aware of. It's about your family." I closed my eyes, already knowing that whatever he was about to tell me would change everything. What kind of chatter? The kind that suggests your secret isn't going to stay secret much longer. Someone's been asking questions, and they're getting close to answers you might not be ready to share. After I hung up with Carlos, I stood at my window looking out at the city lights reflected in the water below. Portland felt different tonight. Smaller somehow, as if the comfortable distance I'd maintained between my two lives was collapsing rapidly. Tomorrow, I'd learn exactly how close my family was to discovering the truth about Harvest Moon, and I'd have to decide whether to continue hiding or finally reveal who I'd become. The woman who'd paid that $400 dinner bill without complaint was about to disappear forever, replaced by someone my family had never bothered to meet. Maya Chen, successful restaurateur, property owner, businesswoman who'd built something meaningful from her grandmother's legacy and her own vision. Whether they'd be proud of her or resentful of her success remained to be seen, but either way, the game was about to change completely. The next morning arrived with the kind of gray Portland drizzle that makes everything look like a watercolor painting left out in the rain. I arrived at Harvest Moon an hour before our usual opening time, finding Carlos already in the kitchen preparing for the day's service. The restaurant felt different in the morning quiet, peaceful in a way that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with this space in the first place. "Coffee?" Carlos offered, gesturing toward the espresso machine we'd imported from Italy during our initial build-out. "Please," I said, settling onto one of the bar stools at the kitchen counter. "Now tell me what's going on." Carlos handed me a perfect cappuccino, the foam art forming a delicate leaf pattern on the surface. "Yesterday afternoon, after your family left, we had some interesting visitors," he began. Jessica came back around 10:30 with a few friends. They'd been drinking at that cocktail bar in the Pearl, and she wanted to show off the restaurant where she'd had dinner. My stomach tightened. "Show off how?" She was giving them a tour of the dining room, pointing out details, talking about the food quality, the service, how exclusive the place was. Normal stuff, except she kept referring to her connections in the industry, how she had an inside track to getting reservations here. I took a sip of my cappuccino, trying to prepare myself for whatever was coming next. Go on. One of her friends works in food media. Sarah Morrison, she writes for Portland Eats magazine. Sarah started asking specific questions about the restaurant, about who owns it, how long we've been open, that kind of thing. Jessica kept deflecting, saying she had to protect her sources, but she was clearly enjoying the mystery. Did Sarah figure anything out? Carlos nodded grimly. She's good at her job. She started putting pieces together pretty quickly. The timing of our opening, the location, the fact that your sister seemed to know details about the restaurant that most customers wouldn't pick up on. I arranged for our private dining room to be set up for the dinner. The intimate space adjacent to the main dining room where we usually hosted special events and wine tastings. I worked with our chef to design a special tasting menu that would showcase the best of what Harvest Moon had to offer, and I prepared a small presentation about the restaurant's history and my role in creating it. Saturday arrived with unseasonably clear skies, as if Portland was putting on its best face for the evening ahead. I spent the day at the restaurant, working with Carlos and the staff to ensure everything would be perfect. Not because I wanted to show off, but because I wanted my family to understand exactly what I'd built, exactly what their little Maya had accomplished while they were focused on their own needs and problems. As 7 o'clock approached, I positioned myself in the private dining room, wearing a black dress I'd bought for industry events, paired with the pearl necklace my grandmother had left me. I wanted to look like the successful business owner I was, not the accommodating younger sister they expected to see. Jessica arrived first, as I'd known she would, followed quickly by Mom, Ashley, and Ryan. They entered the private dining room with obvious excitement, clearly impressed by the elegant space and the special treatment they assumed I'd somehow arranged. "Maya, this is incredible," Jessica gushed, taking in the room's warm lighting and carefully arranged table settings. "How did you manage to get us a private room? This place must be booked solid." "I have my ways," I said, which was certainly true. Mom settled into her chair with the satisfied air of someone accustomed to special treatment. "This is lovely, darling. You really have outdone yourself tonight. I hope you're not spending too much on us." Her concern was as fake as everything else about their appreciation. They wanted the experience of dining in an exclusive private room at one of Portland's best restaurants, but they wanted to maintain the fiction that they were somehow doing me a favor by allowing me to pay for it. "Don't worry about the cost," I said. "Tonight is special." Our server for the evening was Maria, the hostess I'd spoken with on the night of their first visit. She'd volunteered to handle the private room service when I'd explained what I was planning, curious to see how my family would react to learning the truth. "Good evening, everyone," Maria said, approaching the table with the professional warmth that had made her one of our most valued staff members. "We have a very special tasting menu prepared for you tonight, featuring some of our most popular dishes and a few items that aren't available to the general public." I watched my family's faces light up at the mention of exclusive menu items. They loved feeling special, loved believing they had access to experiences that other people couldn't obtain. They just had no idea how they'd actually gained that access. As Maria poured wine and began describing the first course, I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. This was the last time I'd sit at a table with my family while they remained, ignorant of who I really was. After tonight, everything would be different. Whether that change would be positive or negative remained to be seen, but the deception would finally be over. The first course arrived: house-cured salmon with dill cream and potato crisps, paired with a crisp Oregon Riesling. I watched my family taste the dish with the kind of reverent attention usually reserved for religious experiences. "This is extraordinary," Mom declared, dabbing her lips with her napkin. "Maya, you simply must tell us how you discovered this place. I've never had salmon prepared like this." "The story of how I discovered Harvest Moon is actually quite interesting," I said, setting down my wine glass. "In fact, that's part of what I wanted to talk to you all about tonight." Jessica looked at me with curiosity, though she was too focused on her meal to give me her full attention. You mean there's more to the story than just good research and connections? Much more, I confirmed. But let's enjoy our dinner first. We'll talk about it over dessert. The meal continued, with each course more impressive than the last. Roasted duck breast with cherry gastrique, wild mushroom risotto with truffle oil, locally sourced vegetables prepared with techniques that elevated them to art. With each dish, my family's appreciation grew more effusive, their praise for my supposed ability to secure such an incredible dining experience more elaborate. They had no idea they were eating food prepared according to recipes I'd developed, served in a space I'd designed, accompanied by wines I'd personally selected. They were experiencing my creative vision, my business acumen, my success, while continuing to treat me like the naive younger sister who existed primarily to solve their financial problems. As we finished our main courses and Maria began clearing the table, I felt the moment approaching when everything would change. In a few minutes, I would tell them the truth about Harvest Moon, about my role in creating this restaurant, about the real source of the money they'd been so willing to accept over the years. Before we have dessert, I said, standing up from the table, I have something I'd like to share with all of you. Something I probably should have told you a long time ago. The room grew quiet as they turned their attention toward me, their faces showing a mixture of curiosity and mild concern. They were probably expecting me to announce an engagement or a new job opportunity, or perhaps some kind of financial windfall that would benefit them all. They had no idea that the windfall had already happened 3 years ago, and they'd been enjoying its benefits ever since, without ever bothering to ask where it came from. The truth is, I began, my voice steady and clear, I haven't been entirely honest with you about my work situation, about what I do for a living, about where my money comes from, about how I've been able to help you all so frequently over the years. Jessica's fork paused halfway to her mouth. What do you mean? I reached into my purse and pulled out a business card, the same type that David had slipped me a few nights earlier. I placed it in the center of the table where they could all see it clearly. Maya Chen, owner and operator, Harvest Moon Bistro. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the soft jazz playing in the main dining room, the distant sounds of the kitchen staff preparing desserts, the gentle hum of conversation from other diners enjoying their meals in my restaurant. I don't understand, Ashley said finally, her voice small and confused. This is your restaurant? This is my restaurant, I confirmed. I've owned it for 3 years. I built it using the inheritance Grandma Chen left me. The money you all assumed came from Dad's life insurance. Every meal you've eaten here, every bill I've paid, every time you've praised my ability to get reservations at this exclusive place, you've been experiencing something I created. The expressions on their faces shifted from confusion to shock to something that looked suspiciously like calculation, as if they were already trying to figure out what my revelation meant for their future financial expectations. The silence stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. I watched their faces process the information, saw the moment when the implications began to sink in. Jessica was the first to speak, her voice tight with something between disbelief and anger. You're telling us you've owned this restaurant the entire time? When we were here last week, when you paid that $400 bill, you were essentially paying yourself? Not exactly, I said, maintaining my calm tone. The restaurant has expenses, staff salaries, overhead costs. When I pay for meals here, that money goes toward supporting the business and the people who work for it. But yes, ultimately, I was paying a bill at my own establishment. Ryan leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from shock to something that looked like anger. So all those times you made us feel guilty for letting you pick up expensive dinner tabs, you were actually just moving money around between your own accounts. I never made you feel guilty, I replied firmly. I never complained about paying for your meals, never made comments about the cost, never asked any of you to contribute. You all simply assumed I would pay, ordered the most expensive items available, and left me to handle the bill without discussion. Mom's face had gone pale, but her voice carried that familiar edge of disapproval that had shaped so many family conversations over the years. Maya, this is deceptive. You let us believe you were struggling as a freelance designer while you were actually running a successful business. How long were you planning to keep lying to us? The accusation hung in the air like smoke. After years of accepting my financial support without question, after treating me like their personal ATM for every crisis and convenience, they were now positioning themselves as the victims of my deception. I wasn't lying, I said carefully. I never told you I was struggling. You all made assumptions about my financial situation based on limited information, and I chose not to correct those assumptions. Sarah asked David a few casual questions when Jessica wasn't listening, and David handled it professionally, but Sarah's smart. She left here with enough information to start digging. I felt the walls of my carefully constructed double life beginning to crumble. How much does she know? She knows someone in your family has a connection to the restaurant that goes beyond just being a customer. She knows Jessica was lying about having industry connections, and she knows there's a story here worth investigating. The irony was almost laughable. Jessica's desire to impress her friends with her supposed insider knowledge had triggered exactly the kind of attention I'd been avoiding for 3 years. Her need to appear important and well-connected was about to expose the truth she'd never bothered to discover on her own. There's more, Carlos continued, his expression growing even more serious. This morning, I got a call from Tom Henderson at the Oregonian. He's working on a feature about successful women in Portland's restaurant scene, and your name came up during his research. Apparently, Sarah Morrison mentioned her suspicions to him, and now he's asking questions too. I set down my coffee cup with hands that weren't quite steady. What kind of questions? The kind that suggest he already knows you own this place. He was asking about your background, how you got started in the restaurant business, what inspired you to open Harvest Moon. He was professional about it, but he clearly has sources who've confirmed the basic facts. The careful separation I'd maintained between Maya, the struggling graphic designer, and Maya, the successful restaurateur, was dissolving rapidly. Once the media started paying attention, it would be impossible to keep my family in the dark about my real circumstances. How long do you think I have before this becomes public knowledge? I asked. Days, maybe a week if you're lucky. Tom Henderson is thorough, but he's also fast. If he's decided there's a story here, he'll have it written and published quickly. I walked to the window overlooking the dining room, watching the morning light filter through the glass. This space represented everything I'd worked for, everything I'd built from my grandmother's legacy and my own dreams. In a few days, it would also represent the end of the relationship dynamic I'd maintained with my family for years. There's something else you should consider, Carlos said gently. Jessica's been telling people she has connections in the food industry. When it comes out that you own this place, it's going to look like she was lying about having insider access, which technically she was. That could be embarrassing for her professionally. I turned back to face him. You're saying this is going to cause problems for her beyond just the family drama. I'm saying she's painted herself into a corner by claiming expertise and connections she doesn't actually have. When the truth comes out, people are going to remember her claims about having industry access. If she works in any field where credibility matters, this could impact her reputation. The thought gave me no satisfaction. Despite everything that had happened, despite the pattern of financial exploitation and emotional manipulation, I'd finally recognized I didn't want to see Jessica's professional life damaged. I just wanted our family relationships to be based on honesty and mutual respect, instead of financial dependency and convenient lies. What do you think I should do? I asked. Carlos leaned against the counter, considering his words carefully. You could try to get ahead of this. Contact the reporters yourself. Give them the story on your terms. Control the narrative. Or you could tell your family first. Let them hear it from you before they read about it in the newspaper. Both options felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, preparing to jump without knowing what waited at the bottom. Telling my family the truth would mean confronting years of financial manipulation and emotional dishonesty. Letting the media break the story would mean dealing with the fallout while also managing the public attention that came with being featured as a successful business owner. I need some time to think, I said finally. You don't have much time, Carlos reminded me gently. Tom Henderson is planning to publish this week. If you want to control how this story gets told, you need to make a decision soon. I spent the rest of the morning walking through downtown Portland, trying to process the reality that my carefully maintained double life was about to end. The city felt different today, charged with the energy of impending change. Every familiar street, corner and coffee shop reminded me of the woman I'd been before I opened Harvest Moon, the woman who'd defined herself primarily through her willingness to solve other people's problems. By afternoon, I'd made my decision. I wasn't going to wait for the media to tell my story, and I wasn't going to let my family discover the truth through a newspaper article. I was going to invite them to Harvest Moon for what they assumed would be another expensive meal at my expense, and I was going to tell them exactly who had been paying for their entertainment all along. I called Jessica first, knowing she'd coordinate with the others and ensure everyone would attend. Maya, she answered on the second ring, her voice bright with the artificial enthusiasm she used when she wanted something. I was just thinking about you. Ryan and I were talking about how amazing dinner was the other night. We're already planning our next visit. Actually, that's why I'm calling, I said, keeping my voice casual. I thought it would be nice to have another family dinner this weekend. Same place, if everyone's available. At Harvest Moon again? Maya, that's so generous. But are you sure you can afford it twice in 1 week? I mean, I saw the prices on that menu, and with everything you've been helping us with lately. Her fake concern about my finances would have been laughable, if it weren't so insulting. She was pretending to worry about my ability to pay for dinner while simultaneously planning to order the most expensive items available. I can manage, I assured her. Saturday night, 7 o'clock. Can you let everyone know? Of course. This is so exciting. I'll call Mom and Ashley right now. Oh, and Maya? Thank you. I know we don't say it enough, but we really appreciate how good you are to our family. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment for a long time, watching the rain streak down my windows. Saturday night would change everything. In 3 days, my family would learn that the woman they'd been treating as their personal bank account was actually one of the most successful restaurateurs in Portland. They'd discover that the expensive dinners they'd been enjoying at my expense were taking place in a restaurant I owned, served by staff I'd hired, featuring food prepared according to my vision and standards. I spent the next 2 days preparing, not just logistically, but emotionally. I rehearsed conversations in my head, trying to anticipate how each family member might react to the news. Would Jessica be angry that I'd hidden my success from them? Would Mom feel guilty about all the financial support she'd accepted under false pretenses? Would they be proud of what I'd accomplished, or resentful that I'd achieved more than they'd realized? By Friday evening, I'd decided exactly how I wanted to handle the reveal. There's a difference. Is there? Jessica's voice was rising, attracting glances from Maria, who was discreetly arranging dessert service at the side table. You let us think you were sacrificing to help us, that you were putting yourself at financial risk to cover our expenses. Do you have any idea how that makes us feel now? The irony was breathtaking. They were angry at me for letting them believe I was making sacrifices on their behalf, while simultaneously never having bothered to ask about those supposed sacrifices or offering to reduce them. How does it make you feel? I asked genuinely. Because I'm curious about your perspective on this. Ashley, who had been quiet since my revelation, finally spoke up. It makes us feel manipulated, Maya. Like you were testing us or something, seeing how much we'd be willing to take from you while thinking you couldn't afford it. And how much were you willing to take? The question came out sharper than I'd intended, but I didn't regret asking it. The room fell silent again. They couldn't answer that question without acknowledging the pattern of behavior that had brought us to this moment. They couldn't explain their willingness to accept expensive meals, financial bailouts, and consistent support from someone they believed was struggling without revealing their own sense of entitlement. Mom recovered first, shifting tactics with the skill of someone who'd spent decades managing family conflicts. The issue isn't what we were willing to accept, Maya. The issue is your dishonesty. Family members shouldn't keep secrets this significant from each other. You're right, I agreed. Family members shouldn't keep secrets. They also shouldn't treat each other like convenient solutions to financial problems. They shouldn't make jokes about each other's supposed generosity while planning to exploit it. They shouldn't lie to get restaurant reservations and then brag about having industry connections they don't actually possess. Jessica's face flushed red. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the conversation I overheard when I arrived for Mom's birthday dinner. The one where you called me a doormat, where you joked about how I'd always pay if you just asked nicely, where you discussed using my supposed connections to get reservations at places like this. The color drained from Jessica's face as she realized I'd been listening to their private conversation that night. Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and Ashley suddenly became very interested in her water glass. I'm also talking about how you came back here later that night with your friends, claiming to have industry connections that got you access to exclusive restaurants. How you told people you had inside information about Portland's food scene, when the truth is you've never bothered to learn anything about what I actually do for work. Maria approached the table with dessert, sensing the tension but maintaining her professional composure. Shall I serve the dessert course, or would you prefer a few more minutes? Please serve it, I said. We're almost finished with our conversation. As Maria began placing individual chocolate tarts in front of each family member, I continued, the truth is, I built this restaurant because I wanted to create something meaningful, something that would honor Grandma Chen's memory and contribute positively to our community. I kept it private from you because I wanted to see who you really were when you thought no one important was watching. And what did you discover? Mom asked, her tone icy. I discovered that you're all perfectly comfortable taking significant financial support from someone you believe can't afford it. I discovered that you've never once asked about my dreams, my goals, or my well-being when it didn't relate to your own needs. I discovered that you see me as a convenient resource rather than a person with my own life and ambitions. Jessica slammed her hand on the table, causing the wine glasses to tremble. That's not fair, Maya. We care about you. We've always cared about you. When? I asked quietly. When have you cared about me in a way that didn't involve needing something from me? When have you asked about my happiness, my relationships, my professional goals, my personal challenges? When have you offered to support me through anything? Difficult? The questions hung in the air unanswered because we all knew the truth. Their care for me was conditional, tied to my usefulness in solving their problems and funding their lifestyle choices. Ryan finally spoke, his voice defensive. You never seemed like you needed support. You always had everything together, always seemed financially stable. We thought you were doing well. I am doing well, I said. I'm doing better than any of you realized. But that doesn't mean I never needed emotional support, never wanted someone to ask how I was doing, never hoped for family relationships that weren't based primarily on financial transactions. Ashley set down her fork without tasting the dessert. So what happens now? Are you cutting us off? Is this your way of telling us you're done helping family? I'm telling you that things need to change, I said. I'm telling you that I want relationships with all of you that are based on mutual respect and genuine care, not on your financial needs and my ability to meet them." "That sounds like cutting us off," Jessica said bitterly. "It sounds like setting boundaries," I corrected. "It sounds like expecting to be treated like a family member rather than a bank account." Mom gathered her composure and fixed me with the stern look that had intimidated me throughout my childhood. "Maya, you're being dramatic. Family helps family. That's how it's always been, and that's how it should continue to be. The fact that you have more resources than we realized doesn't change our relationships. Doesn't it?" I asked. "Because, from where I'm sitting, it seems like my resources are the foundation of our relationships. When was the last time any of you called me just to check in, without needing anything? When was the last time any of you offered to help me with something, even something small?" They couldn't answer because we all knew those conversations had never happened. Every interaction we'd had in recent years had been initiated either by their needs or by family obligations like birthdays and holidays. "I want you all to understand something," I said, standing up from the table again. "I'm proud of what I've built here. I'm proud of providing jobs for 32 people. Proud of creating a space where families and couples can share meaningful meals together. Proud of supporting local farmers and suppliers through our sourcing practices. I'm proud of turning Grandma Chen's legacy into something that contributes positively to our community." I gestured around the private dining room, with its warm lighting and carefully chosen artwork. This restaurant represents 3 years of 18-hour days, of learning about everything from health codes to supply chain management, of building relationships with staff and customers and suppliers. It represents my vision, my hard work, and my success. And until tonight, none of you had any idea it existed. Jessica's eyes filled with tears, though whether from sadness or anger, I couldn't tell. "So you're saying we're terrible people for not knowing about your secret business?" "I'm saying you're people who never bothered to really know me," I replied gently. "You created a version of Maya that served your purposes, and you never looked beyond that version to see who I actually am." The dessert course sat largely untouched as my family processed what I'd told them. Finally, Mom spoke again, her voice carefully controlled. "What do you want from us, Maya? An apology? A promise to change? What would make this right in your mind?" "I want honesty," I said. "I want relationships that aren't based on financial dependency. I want you to see me as a successful woman who's built something meaningful, not as a convenient solution to your problems." "And if we can't give you that?" Ryan asked, his tone challenging. "Then we'll have to figure out what kind of relationship, if any, we can have going forward." The finality in my voice seemed to surprise them. They'd expected me to back down, to apologize for my deception, to reassure them that nothing would really change despite my revelations. Instead, I was drawing clear lines about what I would and wouldn't accept in our future interactions. Ashley started crying quietly, her tears dropping onto the untouched chocolate tart in front of her. "This feels like you're punishing us for accepting help you offered freely." "I'm not punishing anyone," I said, sitting back down and reaching across to touch her hand gently. "But I need you to understand that offering help and being taken advantage of are different things. I need you to understand that family relationships should involve mutual care and respect, not just one person consistently supporting everyone else." "So what happens now?" Jessica asked, her earlier anger replaced by something that looked like genuine uncertainty. "Now we see if we can build something real together," I said, starting with honesty about who we all are and what we all need from each other. Maria discreetly approached the table again. "Can I get anyone coffee or tea?" "Actually," I said, "I think we're ready for the check." Jessica automatically reached for her purse, then stopped, realizing the absurdity of the gesture. "I guess you don't need us to worry about splitting the bill tonight." "No," I agreed. But maybe next time we can have dinner somewhere that's not my restaurant, and we can all contribute to the check like most families do. The idea seemed revolutionary to them. The concept that they might actually pay for their own meals rather than assuming I'd handle all expenses. It was a small thing, but it represented the kind of fundamental change that would be necessary if we were going to rebuild our relationships on healthier foundations. As we prepared to leave the private dining room, Mom turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Maya, I want you to know that I am proud of what you've accomplished. This restaurant is beautiful, and you should be proud of building it." "Thank you," I said, though I noticed she hadn't apologized for years of financial exploitation or acknowledged the pattern of behavior that had brought us to this confrontation. Jessica was next, her voice small and uncertain. "I'm sorry we didn't know about this, Maya. I'm sorry we never asked the right questions. It wasn't quite an apology for their behavior, but it was closer than I'd expected to get." "I'm sorry I didn't trust you enough to tell you the truth sooner," I replied. As we walked through the main dining room toward the exit, I saw my staff, watching discreetly, curious about how the evening had unfolded. Carlos caught my eye from the kitchen pass and nodded slightly, a gesture of support that meant more to me than any words my family had spoken tonight. Outside, Portland's evening. Air carried the scent of rain and blooming cherry trees. My family stood uncertainly on the sidewalk, as if unsure how to proceed now that the comfortable dynamics of our relationships had been permanently altered. "Will you call us?" Ashley asked, vulnerability replacing her earlier defensiveness. "Yes," I said. "But things are going to be different going forward. I hope you can understand why they need to be." As they dispersed to their cars, each lost in their own thoughts about what had just transpired, I remained on the sidewalk outside my restaurant. Through the windows, I could see the dinner service continuing, other families and couples enjoying meals together, my staff providing the attentive service that had made Harvest Moon successful. 3 years ago, I'd opened this restaurant with the dream of creating a space where people could connect over beautiful food in an atmosphere of warmth and genuine hospitality. Tonight, I'd finally connected with my own family in a moment of painful but necessary honesty. Whether that connection would grow into something healthier remained to be seen, but at least it was now based on truth rather than comfortable deceptions. I walked around to the back entrance and let myself into my office, where Carlos was waiting with a cup of tea and a concerned expression. "How did it go?" he asked. "About as well as could be expected," I said, settling into my desk chair. "They're shocked, hurt, angry, and probably calculating how my revelation affects their future financial expectations. Any regrets about telling them?" I considered the question seriously. The evening had been difficult, emotionally draining, and had probably damaged my relationships with my family in ways that might never be fully repaired. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was living authentically, without the exhausting effort of maintaining false narratives about who I was and what I'd achieved. "No regrets," I said finally. "Whatever happens next, at least it will be based on honesty." Carlos nodded and headed toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. You deserve family relationships that celebrate your success instead of exploiting it." After he left, I sat alone in my office, listening to the familiar sounds of my restaurant winding down from another successful service. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, both personal and professional. The media attention Carlos had warned me about would likely intensify now that my family knew the truth. My relationships with Jessica, Mom, Ashley, and Ryan would require careful navigation as we all adjusted to new dynamics. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, I felt completely honest about who I was. Maya Chen, successful restaurateur, business owner, woman who'd honored her grandmother's legacy by building something meaningful and beautiful. No more hiding behind false narratives about struggling freelance work. No more pretending to be smaller than I was to make other people comfortable. The woman who'd paid that first $400 dinner bill without complaint was gone forever, replaced by someone who demanded respect, honesty, and genuine care from the people who claimed to love her. Whether my family could meet those demands remained to be seen, but I was finally ready to find out. As I turned off the lights and locked my office, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with the evening's confrontations and everything to do with finally living as my authentic self. The game was over, the masks were off, and whatever came next would be built on the solid foundation of truth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.